So I will get us started here by asking first Mahmoud to describe to us the work of this very fascinating enterprise, Jouzour. Then we'll turn to Metwaly for his remarks, and then Professor Bremer. So please. Yeah, please feel free to stand there.
Okay. Hello. You hear me well? Okay. My name is Mahmoud Sherif. I'm a co-founder and the business development manager in Jouzour company. First, let me tell you about something. We have a very important and useful resource in Egypt that instead of using it, we burn millions of kilograms of it every year. This resource is called dead palm midribs. In Egypt, we have about 13 million palms all over Egypt. Every palm gives us 25 kilogram of midrips every year. About 90% of all of this are burned and turned to be to have a negative impact on environment instead of using it. In the same time, we have a very strong furniture industry in Egypt that depends mainly on imported woods. Egypt imports wood by $1.1 billion every year to satisfy the needs of furniture industry. So what we are basically do is turning the dead palm midribs into wood balls that could satisfy the needs of furniture industry and could be used in furniture making, in flooring, in wall cladding, and so on. We are making this wood by using our own innovative technology, using machines that we designed and manufactured. Um, and in the last 2 years, we worked on developing our technology and to make sure it will fit in mass production scale. And same time, we worked on our supply chain network to make sure we can get enough midribs or raw material through our operations. We are not just working to solve the environmental problems made by the burning of dead palm midribs or the problems of the furniture sector. But mainly we are trying to provide more jobs for people in rural areas. So people can work in their villages instead of go to Egypt or go to Cairo or Alex to find job. They can use the local material to work and create more jobs in their villages. So we are working now to scale up. We are working to get more support to have more investment in R&D and establish our first production unit in Aswan, and in some time have enough resource to buy midribs and work on it and turn it into wood. That's all. Thank you.
So that was Mahmoud Sherif. I should have pointed out Mahmoud is one of the co-founders as well as now the business development manager of Jouzour. We'll hear now from Mr. Metwaly Magdy, co-founder and marketing manager of Recyclobekia. Please.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for being here today. Does anyone know about Recyclobekia? Is anyone familiar with the name? Yeah, I know you're familiar. Okay. My name is Metwaly. I'm the market manager of Recyclobekia and the co-founder. I'd like to start with a brief story of our startup, because I like the beginnings, actually. We were 20 ambitious engineer. We were just like doing something great for our society and for our company, for our country. So first we heard about Injaz. So they told us how startups can change the world we are living in. So we liked the idea, and we had an engineering background. So for the electronics, basically, so we just came across the idea of electronic recycling, which is revolutionizing in this stage, because it's this was really new to us in Egypt and in the Middle East. When you just searched about the term itself, it's just new. So what is electronic recycling? Electronic waste is the computer devices we all use, laptops, computer units, and computer screens, whatever. This goes to landfills, goes to waste. So recycling is just getting the most benefit out of it, because electronic waste has a lot of precious metals. So we thought it was a great idea to start with. Basically, what we are doing is we are collecting this electronic waste from the sources. The sources are mainly the three sources: traders, which is the informal sector, collecting this electronic waste from companies, from government organizations, also from corporates itself. We directly communicate with corporates, and recently the individuals. I would like I would like to talk much about the individuals part of it, because it's really revolutionizing. When we started, we actually thought about individuals first, but due to our financial situation, it wasn't practical to start with individuals. We just started with collecting from traders, because it's huge quantities. It's more beneficial. So we started experimenting with collection from individuals. It was like an online platform. You can register, and then we can go to your home, pick up your electronics, and then you get a voucher for the electronics, a voucher as an incentive to recycling. Actually, the other model, which is corporate, we are communicating with corporate, because electronic waste is very dangerous, very hazardous material. It contains a lot of lead, a lot of mercury, a lot of hazardous material. It just goes to waste in underground water, and when it handled inappropriately, it can cause serious harm to health. So we are communicating with the corporate, and then collecting the electronic waste they have, and then giving them a green certificate for doing recycling properly. After collection, we do the sorting. We just move to our warehouse, do the sorting, because there are many grades of the electronics. Then do the packaging, and then send to a refinery, which is a recycling factory, actually 100% green recycling factory. We dealt with many factories in Hong Kong, in Europe, and actually now we are dealing with some corporate in United States, which is dynamic recycling. Well, I'd like to talk about challenges we had in the startup. First, the inawareness in our society about the electronic waste itself, because it's a new term. Not anyone knows about the electronic waste recycling. It's a new term, so we had a great challenge educating people about the term itself, what it's meant, why we want to do recycling to the electronic waste. Actually, we had the financial disaster only after the 1330 June revolution in 2012. That's because our operations is just cash draining, just needs a lot of cash, a lot of working capital. So political instability was a great obstacle at the point. Also, I would like to talk about the government issue, because in a startup you would like to grow, yeah. So we will grow fast, but the government papers and government regulations just crippled the growth rate. Now we changed our vision. Not only the electronic waste recycling. We just want to be a 30/60 recycling company. We started a project with the biggest mall in Egypt, actually the City Stars Mall. We are going to make a recycling system inside the mall for the sorting, and then we collect the solid waste and organic waste from the mall, and then sort it out, and then sell to recycling factories in Egypt, actually. And we think it's a great move for us to be not just electronic waste, but solid waste, organic waste, maybe in the future hazardous waste like medical waste and other things. For the electronic waste, also we would like to expand in the region. We have connections in Morocco and in Tunisia, maybe in the Gulf in the future. So we think it would be a great deal to be not just in Egypt, but serve the Middle East as a greater vision. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Metwaly. We're going to get a little bit of technical help here to get another presentation up and invite Professor Jennifer Bremer, a visiting associate professor at the Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies, and a person with very long experience in Egypt and in the subject matter of governance of economic activity and other related fields, and we look forward to her comments. Please, Professor.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here, and I'm kind of short, so I'll see if I can get the microphone down without having to close the computer. I think this has been a really interesting discussion so far, and I'm certainly looking forward to the continuing discussions. And I'm especially pleased to be on a panel with two such dynamic, relatively young entrepreneurs who are working in an area that is clearly extremely important for Egypt, trying to do things to improve the environment as well as creating jobs and building on some of the traditional industries such as the famous recycling industry of Egypt, and as well the furniture industry. So I'm going to talk a little bit first about these two of the companies. The third one, I think, is here. Perhaps can make some comments during the question and answer period. As I was asked to make some comments, I think both of these are very promising models, although I note that neither of them talked about whether or not they were actually making a profit, which is really important in business. Sometimes people criticize profit, strangely enough. But if you think of profit as meaning that the value of what you're producing exceeds the cost of what you are using, then that it really, I think, says a lot about why profit is so essential for economic growth. And if you're not making a profit, it becomes, of course, much harder to grow. It's natural for a business when it's just starting out not to be very profitable, but hopefully that will turn around. But perhaps they're profitable now. Maybe they could say something on that in the comments. These are both really interesting ideas, but I'm especially attracted to the one on with the palm fronds, the palm ribs, having worked for many years in agriculture in Egypt, going back even into the 70s. And of course, having been at AUC for 6 years, where we're proud to have 5,000 palms on the campus, perhaps a small share of the national supply, but still a pretty good number. And of course, one sees the palm fronds all the time falling off seasonally, or being cut off seasonally. Both of these are obviously making innovations in Egypt. I'm struck by the similarity in the palm frond one, palm ribs, to the progress that has been made with bamboo, which is also a natural, of course, a natural product, and was being used in very traditional furniture, as palm ribs have been forever, and you see them in agricultural, in little crates and so forth, but now has become a very high-profile building material, particularly for interior decoration. But I've also heard that there are other things that one can do with prime ribs, such as even use them in place of rebar in reinforcement of concrete and in reinforcement of roofs, particularly for rural construction, where there's a huge need for expanding housing in Egypt. So maybe perhaps there's some other uses as well as furniture, although presumably furniture would be the high value one. With regard to the recycling, I noticed that it's always a choice for an entrepreneur whether you broaden your model or you continue to build within the same model. And I think you're kind of wrestling, it seems to me, between the lines that you're sort of wrestling with that. On the one hand, having a very simple, straightforward model that you can really get good at has a lot of advantages. But on the other hand, if it's not really working financially, it doesn't have as many advantages as perhaps seeing what other kinds of extensions there are on that. Certainly, there's a huge need in Egypt to recycle technology products. One of the things which you didn't mention, but I'm sure you're very much aware of, is that even worse than disposing them and getting into the water supply is burning them. And that definitely does happen, that things are discarded and then burned because they can release very toxic chemicals. So I think these are both good examples, and I hope we'll get some good discussion on that. So when you look at what SMEs need, and some of these things were covered, so I'll just go over them really quickly. You need a clear and supportive regulatory framework. You need a level playing field. And as we saw in the discussion this morning, that still is an issue. And you need kind of a couple of additional things. You need a competitive operating environment. So not just having competition, but something that permits you to be competitive. You need a productive workforce, access to information, and access to capital. I'm going to comment on each of these. With regard to the regulatory framework, there is still a long ways to go in addressing the doing business constraints, the basic constraints of how long it takes a company to complete basic procedures with the government. Alex Shalaby mentioned earlier that the question of bankruptcy. Somebody asked about the one-stop shop, and this is a very important example, I think, because the one-stop shop was successful on one level in that it permits companies to get the basic pieces of the registration done, but it does not address what I see as the largest constraint, which is the problem at the high. And if anybody knows Egypt, they know the high. And the district office that must provide the operating permit. Many companies, I've had students doing research on this in Cairo, they're able to get the tax card and the basic registration. They are never, ever able to get the approval of the high. And what that means is that they're open to corruption and to inspectors and regulators of various sorts, closing them down and collecting bribes from them constantly. And there's a misperception that those bribes are primarily going to the lower level officials. They're collected by the lower level officials, but many of those are being bribe farmed up the channel where only a portion is kept by the cop or the inspector, and the rest is flowing upward into really huge amounts of money at the top of the system. So it's important to recognize that it's not just OT money, it's not just petty corruption, it's a major problem for these guys. The leveling the playing field, there's increasing attention to the need for the leadership in countries like Egypt, the leadership in the government, but I think most importantly, the leadership in the private sector, to recognize that if the country is really going to succeed economically, to progress, to not only to create jobs, but to grow, to become the great country that Egypt, for example, certainly it is culturally and historically, but economically it's not, and socially it's not. And to recognize that moving in that direction will actually make the country more secure and create better opportunities for growth for the upper levels of the economy as well as for other levels. But that I think has still really not quite happened, although one can hope that it's beginning to happen. The cost of operation, there used to be a thing called the Brazil cost, under which companies in Brazil complained about at every step. Things cost a little bit more. Logistics didn't work. They were costly. They were risky. It took a lot of time to move things. Imports were very slow. You couldn't get things out of the bank. There were all these it's sort of the death by 1,000 cuts. And those problems are still very much the case in Egypt, not only with regard to the regulatory structures, but also with regard to, for example, there are almost no third-party logistics companies. Logistics are expensive, unreliable, and difficult, which is very bad for small companies. Of course, there's a problem of the unreliability of power. Water is becoming an issue more and more. So those things add to the operating cost. And fundamentally, if you're not making money, if your company is not being productive, you can't afford to hire more people. This is just a basic reality. So the productivity of a business is fundamental to being able to add new jobs. And these things really cut and restrain that productivity and therefore restrain jobs. The education system was mentioned, what a true disaster the Egyptian education system is. Again, corruption is a major issue in the education system at all levels. It's not just a question of corruption. I mean, of course, these are mostly government, most people are in the government schools. The middle class is largely withdrawn from the public schools, not so much the public universities, but corruption is endemic and just absolutely saps the quality of the education system. It's not the only problem, but it is one of the problems. I don't think so much was made of transparency, and Mr. Shalvey is completely correct. Of course, who would know better than somebody who was the head of one of the largest IT companies, the importance of transparency and the potential of technology to contribute to transparency. As Mr. Van Hassine mentioned, these problems are not technical per se problems. These problems are problems of political will on the part of the elite in the government and the elite outside the government. If you want to make these transactions, this information available, you can. If you want to know how it was that Ahmed Baket reportedly paid 60 piastres a meter for Dreamland, whereas the price of land, even in the informal areas, is several thousand pounds a meter, and there are 100 piastres in a pound. So, if you're going to make that information open, a lot of things are going to become available and evident that people don't want to have known. And then I put capital last. People always talk about capital as being a shortage for businesses, and it is a shortage for businesses. But, Egypt has not moved to things like loan guarantees. They haven't made full use of what are academically called ROSCAs, which are rotating credit and savings societies, which in Egypt are called gamiyat, that everybody seems to participate in, but really using that as an economic tool as well as for social funding. So those are some of the things that really I think need to be addressed. Many of these relate to governance, but they also relate to political will. Political will is a mysterious quantity. Can't really say what causes it, what prevents it, but it is fundamental, I think, for the elite to have what I call Carnegie moments, where they really recognize that fairness is beneficial to the security and growth of the country. And until that happens, I think we'll continue to have discussions like we're having today.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. And you all in the audience will have noticed the logo AmEPA at the bottom of Jennifer's slides. May I ask you to talk very briefly about that association?
Yeah, thanks, and I will make it brief. That's the Association for Middle Eastern Public Policy and Administration. It's a professional society. As far as we know, it's the first regional and only regional society trying to work on sound governance. It was established, we're about 4 years ago. It's an example of the issues with regard to incorporation of NGOs. It is, of course, an NGO that we have been unable to register it anywhere in the region and is therefore registered in the UK. We didn't want to register it in the US. Most of the members are in the region. They are primarily academics in public policy and administration. We have about 400 members, and we will have our fourth annual conference in Cairo in December. At last count, they were planning to make it free. I hope we will see many of you there. It'll be at AUC. AUC is hosting it this year. And the purpose is really to promote dialogue and scholarship, but also engagement with practitioners and involvement of practitioners in really promoting greater integrity and better governance as a key to prosperity and growth, as well as peace in the region.
Well, thank you. And I want to thank Jennifer for a fairly stark depiction of the circumstances at the enterprise level, at the micro level, that entrepreneurs such as our two other guests today are facing. I think it was Metwaly who said the words regulation cripples the growth rate. And I want to ask both of our entrepreneurs about their experiences. We heard from Jennifer quite a bit about the authorization processes that exist. I'd like to ask each of you to elaborate a bit more on your experiences getting formal authority to conduct the businesses that you do. Because it seems to me that both of you create value with activities that may not be accounted for in the regulatory structure in Egypt. And so I was curious if either of you experience that a government agency or some authorizing entity or a bank for that matter had to improvise in order to be able to license or lend or be part of you conducting your business model.
So, as a new concept to Egypt, electronic recycling is fairly new. So imagine that they were conducting some custom fees about the exporting the electronic waste, which is no good because we are creating value out of the electronic waste. Otherwise, it would go to the stream, the waste stream. So that was an example. Another example in the investment part. The government would like to invest in SMEs, but there is somehow the misconception about the financing, because you need to grow fast, but in order to get a loan or investment from the government, it just take a long time and a long licensing, long making papers. It's a disaster in Egypt. The government papers side and other things, and also in the private sector, we have a lot of difficulties for the speed rate in how things is going on with the investment. Basically, I think we need some more open mind about it. I think angel investors are our best options for the entrepreneurs, actually, because they understand how it's really mattered the time that you get investment, and that's why we had our investor he is an angel investor. That was good.
Well, we at the beginning when we tried to register Jouzour as a limited company, it took 4 months for to just register it. So I know, but it's a company. Even I think NGOs took much more time. So and يعني, in the first 6 months, we tried to work with different governmental programs that may help entrepreneurs and innovative ideas and so on. After just 6 months, we decided not to work with any governmental agency. Only permissions and paperwork can consume all company time without any valuable output. So we are just working on permissions or paperwork when we had to, and we are trying to avoid working with any governmental agency as much as we can all the time.
But what about private lenders or private investors? Have you found that your business model doesn't fit in their paradigm, or have you had to challenge the thinking of lenders also to recognize the value of your service, your outputs?
Yes.
That's another issue actually for the investment part, because the investors in Egypt are like close-minded because they want to invest in food industry, in transportation, just the ordinary things. But when they hear about recycling things and this new concept, they are fascinated about the concept itself. They are fascinated about the something new is done in Egypt, but they are not much interested in putting money in this area. So that's I think this is another issue. So we may go into negotiations with some investors. Is quite interested, but at the end it's not just for me. That's the issue.
Okay. For us, we didn't face يعني big challenge getting investors. We met many investors, and so many of them were very interested in working with us. Maybe the only problem was when we are talking about our social goals. Sometimes they say, well, we need to postpone any social goal or any social work for a time. If we are going to make a machine, please make it fully automated. We don't want any workers as it's additional fees for us. So this is the area of conflict, but I think we met many investors that who was very interested, and in the same time I think there is many activities in Egypt through which entrepreneurs can get free money at the beginning. I mean competition and the grants and so on. Actually, it helps us very much in the first 12 months. That's all.
So we're hearing about some rather innovative models, Jennifer, and later in the day we'll probably talk a bit about the tech industry and the impact that the movement of commerce to the web and to handheld devices is having on economic activity generally and business models. Are disconnects becoming more common between regulatory or banking structures in the developing countries with the outputs and services of new businesses that were perhaps unimagined when those structures were developed? And what reactions do you see in your research across the region to previously unimagined economic activity?
Well, I mean, I think without in any way, seeming to be saying that these are not innovative businesses, because they are both very innovative businesses, but I don't think that per se they are something that a banker wouldn't understand. I mean, if the numbers are there, the numbers are there. And, if you can show that you can produce it and there's a market for it, or you can do the service and there's a market and you cover your costs and have something left over, that's really what bankers or other investors are looking for. So I don't think per se it's the question of the model, with one important exception. I happen to be talking with a student who's doing some research on venture capital, so I was helping him to look for some things, and he's going out to Dubai to do his research. One of the comments that has been made about venture capital, and would presumably not so much apply to angel investors, but that venture capital has a real problem, that the riskiness of business in the region, not only in Egypt, but generally, that the risk is very high relative to the return. Now, you can say that's because, on the one hand, the risks are higher, largely because of government delays and lack of infrastructure and lack of these public goods, lack of regulatory structures that really support business. But it also is because the return is lower because of additional costs and so forth. So that in fact, many investors are drawn into real estate or other types of things which have perceived to have at least a sure return. And you see the government putting huge amounts of effort and huge amounts of investment capital into facilitating real estate investments, which are, I think, just one step above fraud in the sense that, they're really not creating jobs. So that's one constraint, that it's not, I think, the question was asked about whether Egyptians or perhaps Arabs more generally are more risk averse, don't like risk. I don't think that's the case. If you look at businesses in Egypt, they are operating, in an incredible headwind of risk, and they are still forging ahead. And some of them are able to succeed. So some of them are able to succeed substantially. The problem is not that they're unwilling to take risk. The problem is that the risks are very high. They're higher than they need to be because of the failures. So I think that's a problem. The other big problem, which hasn't been mentioned so far, but really should be mentioned, is the problem of informality. Not only are many people in urban areas are living in informal areas where it's almost impossible to register a business, and then many others who are not in informal areas are nonetheless operating informally. The vast majority of youth work in the informal sector. And that has a huge cost because it's very hard for an informal business to grow. Can't get capital, is in danger of being harassed more by regulators, et cetera. It can't. It's harder for them to engage in formal transactions. So that is a huge barrier, and the vast majority of the private sector is informal, and even I was talking about this in Egypt with one of my students who was from the upper class, as many at AUC are, and her husband was trying to start a restaurant in Zamalek, which is an upper class area, but the government of Zamalek had ruled no more restaurants. And therefore, they were also unable to register a restaurant, and they were operating illegally. And they had to keep a small boy at the corner, and anytime an inspector was coming, they had to slam down the gates, and pretend not to exist. So, I mean, and this is a restaurant in Zamalek. We're not talking something innovative or, particularly, prone to criminality. So these two problems are huge, and I think are much more than the innovativeness as such, as a barrier.
Okay, well, thank you. I'd like to turn it over to the audience for some questions. I see one at the very back here, and please wait to be recognized, and please identify yourself and your affiliation.
Hi, my name is Rania Saadawi. I work with an organization called Education for Employment, EFE. For those in Egypt, you may know of us. We have local organizations in Middle Eastern countries, and we work on youth employability issues, particularly working with the private sector. We'll take Egypt in this example, places like Souk.com, Vodafone, excuse me, and other places, and we help bridge the skills gap. There's a lot of entry-level job positions for Egyptians that they need to hire for, but they don't have the right skill set. So we provide the training, the soft skills training, the technical skills, and bridge that gap between the education and their first entry-level job. We focus on disadvantaged youth. The best way to describe it is those that don't have a wasta to get into their first job, unemployed for 6 months. But one area that we're looking into working with is SMEs. SMEs is a huge area for job growth, but there's also a lot of issues with human capital. So my question to the panelists are, what are some of the challenges that you have with hiring? What is your structure? How many people you have? If you want to scale, and I know other entrepreneurs as well have this issue, it's really, really hard to find the good employees, especially when you're working in innovative things. So what are some of those challenges that you face? What are some of the issues that you work with or deal with there as well? Not just regulatory, but also just the skills that we can potentially, as the diaspora community or organizations like EFE, can work with in partnership with you in order to help identify and source these people for employeeship. A similar program we did was with Zuba in Zamalek. It's actually a formal restaurant that they established there. But they were expanding and had issues with finding all types of staff levels. And so we worked closely with them to determine what it is that they need. So I'd like to hear from you guys what some of the issues are.
Please.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we don't have a problem getting employees in the innovative areas or getting the right engineers or something. We have a problem in getting workers with no background at all. Actually, we are looking for just 10 or 15 workers, and we don't find any worker who want to wake up early and come and work in physical work and do a physical effort, he preferred to work on driving some tuk-tuk or something. This is our main problem. We don't have, we can't find workers. Maybe in some areas like Wadi Gidid in Egypt, we know people who don't have any jobs, but they don't want to work. So this is our main problem, and I hope we can talk after this. Maybe you can help. Thank you.
I agree with Mahmoud about the point he said. Other point is for startups in general, not for the companies in Egypt. It's having a job description actually, because in startups you have to be in many rules. So I'm a marketing manager. I'm not doing the marketing actually now. I'm doing the planning, doing some research, doing some implementation for some projects. So having some employee that can understand that working in a startup is just challenging, and you have to have a certain a wide set of skills, and you have to invest yourself into the startup is quite a challenge. And also we have a problem in Egypt actually, not in the startups, finding qualified employees because as you know the education is messed up. So that's a problem.
Okay, I'd like to bundle maybe 3 questions, and we'll close. So this gentleman here, or anyone else? Here? And in the back. Okay, so thank you. Please.
Yes, thank you very much. And I want to...
And brief,
yes.
crisp questions, please.
Yes, I want to thank the whole panel, and especially Professor Bremer for her courageous academic attitude of summarizing the whole problem that we are talking about, institutional corruption, not random or small level. My questions to especially the 2 gentlemen, which I like their projects, but how do you know that you depend on raw material? How do you know that you are not in a competition with somebody else, especially with the situation in Egypt where access to information or available to precise information are not there? How do you know that maybe many people are competing for the same thing? And also, are you competing with Zabalin in a way, the big project which we know from the 80s or the 70s? And what do you call your projects in Arabic? Because I would like to see how does it sound to an Egyptian person.
Yes, I'm Jed Schilling again, but I'm wearing a different hat this time. Speaking for TerraBuilt, a small local enterprise that has a partnership with SCS, Sustainable Construction Solutions, set up by Osama El Gabali in Egypt. And the process that's been developed by TerraBuilt is a compressed earth brick, which with a local hydraulic compressor compresses bricks from soil on the building site, adds a little cement to it, and makes a very beneficial building process that helps the environment by greatly reducing CO2 emissions for the construction process, that helps the builder because it's a much less expensive, 10 to 30% less expensive than alternative construction processes, and helps the ultimate owner because it's much better insulation, so his operating costs of the building are much lower, about 50% lower. It also provides much more resistance to noise, pollution, and bullets. So it's a very effective technology. And my question is, with this technology that we're working on, what are the best ways to set up partners in the construction industry to help extend it around? We have a couple of demonstration machines there, and SCS is working with some local partners, but would like to find additional entrepreneurs interested in using this construction material because it's a triple winner and is very innovative, that's likely to expand very rapidly.
Okay, I really appreciate that one, that our entrepreneurs visiting from Egypt are being asked for advice in addition to presenting their own stories. And there was a gentleman at the back there, please.
My question is for Mr. Metwaly from Recyclobekia. I want to ask him about the moving from just handling e-waste to waste in general, and how was that decision taken, and about the amount of competition they're having in such a field. Thank you.
So we had two questions there about competition. The competition for the raw materials that go into your processes, and in particular in the e-waste area, and then your advice for connecting to the construction industry, which is certainly relevant to Jouzour's work. Please, so in either order.
Okay. That's another challenge, actually, the competition. Because, not the competition, basically. As a startup, you are struggling first to know the market. So it took us like 1 year to recognize the market, who is the competitors, where is the market actually, where is the sources of collection. But yani, luckily we had our competitors, which are talking about the traders, the informal sector. We had them our partners. We had them in our side. That's luckily. That's for the electronic waste project, and this was fairly easy. But in the solid waste side, which is the plastics and cartons and other things, you know, the Zabalin is a very closed society, and we are expecting so much troubles from them. I don't think we can cooperate with them as we are doing with for the electronic waste. So I think it's a major challenge for us to handle.
Okay. Concerning the raw material, I don't think we will face challenges in getting raw material. If another company or someone wants to buy all the raw material in Egypt, but he don't have our technology and our machine, he couldn't not make anything out of it. So it's more about our technology and our innovative process that's make a barrier to entry to the market, and its thing gives the raw material its value. About the construction question, I think we already talked with many construction firms in Egypt to start using our wood in their work. We sometimes get some resistance in using new material. We don't try it before and so on, but I think we are making a very good progress in it. Thank you.
Okay, and then just to respond to the last question from this gentleman, I'll ask each of you to state your enterprise's mission statement in Arabic, please. Elevator pitch.
In Arabic?
Yeah. That was the question.
Yeah. It's not an Arabic name. It's sort of an Italian. I think something originated. So Recyclobekia is the word. It's not an Arabic, just a mix. So Recyclobekia, that's it. And Jouzour is an Arabic name, actually. So mission statement. Rubabekia. Rubabekia is a waste, actually. Do you know there is someone who's like a small trader going with a cart in the streets, calling Rubabekia, which is any waste you have in your homes. So this is how the name is originated. No, the Recyclobekia, recycling Rubabekia. That's how the name came. Yeah, something like a mixture.
Okay, our name is in Arabic. Jouzour means roots. And we choose this name as we are thinking we are heading to the root of the problem in Egypt, which is in villages and in rural areas. So we are going to get back to the Jouzour of the mushkila. I mean the roots of mushkila. Yes, and roots of our culture and our, let's say, our heritage in using our local material in making any products. That's thank you.
Well, I want to thank our two RISE entrepreneurs for their presentations. Oh,
We missed the question.
what? I guess we did overlook one question, please.
So moving from electronic waste to solid waste, how this decision was taken. Actually, it's a bit of struggle between the focus and the diversification of the model. First, we wanted to focus on the electronic waste side, but we came to the fact after 3 years of operations that this is a very low profit margin business, and it's very risky to continue in this critical stage when you are just when you miss some container shipping, you're just in a financial crisis. So that's why basically we went for the solid waste thing. We really do like the focus, but we really want our company to be stable at this point. So that's why we went to the solid waste kind of recycling, because it's not as risky as electronic waste, because it's the recycling industry. You know, the Zabalin is a community which is recycling the solid waste actually in Egypt. So it's a very popular and well known. We can get a direct profit out of it.
Comment briefly on the question from EFE, which I know is doing a lot of good work. I've known them from the time they were being founded, Education for Employment. However, I do want to emphasize the point that was made by the speaker initially, that there's a real role for training. And in particular, there is a need in Egypt, as they have done in some other countries. I think Malaysia had done some work on this, to try to valorize, we don't really have a word for that in English, but to try to recognize the value of physical work. And one of the challenges is that I was very surprised to learn that young people in Egypt from the middle and upper class do not do physical work while they're in school, while they're in high school or college. They really have, as a result, they have absolutely no manual skills. It's ridiculous. They can't even change a Butagaz can after 2 years of an engineering school and 9 shams. I mean, really. You know, so there is this real problem that it is considered to be, in some sense, shameful, and that becomes a huge barrier. And that's something I think that has become worse recently. But there is also a need for the educated youth to learn something about the real world by having these unpleasant jobs of working at McDonald's or whatever. That's one thing. But the other thing is that training does not create jobs. If there are no jobs, training just shuffles resumes. And there's a real need to address the underlying factors to why the jobs are not being created, as well as to providing training opportunities.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, gentlemen, for your presentations. I'll ask the audience now to stay in place as we do our turnover and have the members of the next panel with Paul Salem from MEI and the education initiatives and our guest commentator to come on up and take their seats. Thank you again very much for your attention.